X-Men fans fell in love with X-Men 97. As I said in my breakdown of the season finale, it was the most X-Men-y thing I'd ever seen. And I've seen a lot of X-Men stuff. But even many overall Marvel fans declared X-Men 97 the best MCU content they'd seen in a long time. So what lessons can Marvel take from X-Men 97? Specifically to make sure that their live-action X-Men are just as well received, but I think there are some gems here that they could apply across the board. So let's discuss. I'm going to share my thoughts. I look forward to hearing your own down below. First up, comics-accurate characters. It's crazy that that's a lesson that needs to be learned. But this is the foundation, but Hollywood, for a long time, Hollywood has always felt they need to put their stamp on things. And I get it, but, at the beginning, again, when Marvel started out, Kevin Feige is a comic book fan, and he was like, how about I give the people what they want? And it, surprise, surprise, it turned out quite well. And I think that some of the reasons there have been some changes lately is that, there's been, some criticism from people who don't read comics. I understand how this all happened, but now it's time to, pivot again. Not totally going back to where they were, but, you should continue to evolve, speaking of evolution. All right, so the foundation of comics accurate characters are the foundation, right? Which everything else needs to be built on. And as I said, Marvel used to know this. The original lineups, the original costumes, blue and gold teams. I can't tell you what joy it gave me for them to do that. It wasn't even a big part of the show, but you were like, fans are making this show. And also, another reason that Hollywood sometimes will change the original characters is because, they obviously, and I think importantly, want to have representation. But the X-Men are already a very diverse team, from gender to race to religion to sexuality. So everyone can already feel included, and you can still keep the original comics accurate lineup. If fans feel that they're looking at the X-Men, it will go a long way with whatever story the live-action MCU X-Men decides to tell. Comics accurate gives you a lot of goodwill from the fans. And again, this is something that very much benefited Marvel early on. And as I said, we get it. We even get Hollywood's decision back in 2000 to put the X-Men in all black. I don't think you could have done your comics accurate costume back then. But have you seen Hugh Jackman's Wolverine right now? Clearly colorful costumes can not only be done for live action, but done incredibly well. It's beautiful, man. Plus, what's so great about this Wolverine new costume is that it's done in the style of Deadpool's costume, not the MCU costume style, which has become a little cosplay. You can almost see the little booties over sneakers when they're running around. They don't actually do that, but they might as well. This Wolverine costume uses mixed materials. I love that. So even though it's bright and bold, right, it still seems to be practical in many ways. Like it offers some level of protection. You're like, the forearm guards and the shoulder plates. That's so he's protected in the field. Thank you very much. It looks great. If Wolverine can look this good in the yellow, a color, by the way, which is infamous for not looking good on screen, which is why they didn't do it at first, then they can do the rest of the costumes. I don't want to hear it. You can clearly do it. All right, now that you have the foundation, let's head over to story, which should be ripped from the headlines. Did some of the X-Men 97 storylines hit a nerve? Good, they're supposed to. Introduced in the 1960s, the X-Men were seen to reflect the groups. Well, they really lucked out. Sometimes the creators of the X-Men will be like, that wasn't what we were intended. We just wanted to tell a crazy story about mutants, man. But this is the effect that it had and why it was so perfectly timed and why it's so popular. But they're such a popular comic. The X-Men reflected the groups that were fighting for freedom and recognition. Many groups, the civil rights movement, second wave feminism, and even the protests against the Vietnam War. The youth of America was standing up to power, again, across the board in many different areas. And to this day, the X-Men continues to represent that. And it's so well constructed, even if it was by accident, that just think about it. X-Men 97 really had so many parallels to the current conflict in the Middle East. Even though it was written and animated before any of those events took place. But it fit perfectly because, unfortunately, we continue to repeat history, and the X-Men are there to represent that. And I think to like offer a beacon of hope that maybe, as Charles and Xavier were discussing, maybe someday the cycle won't begin anew and, we can go in a different direction. And, some progress is being made. All right. Then, at an even more basic, fundamental level, the X-Men are woke. Not the divisive, awful definition of that word that has taken root in today's culture, horrifically so, but the original meaning of the word, as many of you have pointed out, that comes from the Black community. The X-Men recognize social inequities for all different groups because in addition to being persecuted themselves as mutants, they also have members of their group, of their team, that come from each of those real-life groups that the term woke applies to. X-Men 97 has characters of different race, gender, sexuality, and religion. And unlike most comic book heroes, mutants aren't made, they're born. A la Lady Gaga's anthem for the disenfranchised, Born This Way. That is a huge fundamental difference. And like many groups, they find strength from each other. No, and this is important. This is actually beautiful and something that really clarified for me while I was writing my notes here. And I saw a really great picture of the team standing together, which you can see here. The X-Men find strength with each other. And not just the X-Men, the official team, but all mutants together. Not just learning how to use their powers, but standing together, fighting together, also learning their history together and thinking together, discussing together, challenging each other, right? So often the world sees such gatherings as a dangerous mob, as they so often do the X-Men in the comic book stories. But the X-Men show the benefit, the necessity of such togetherness and why it's important for said groups. I just love the X-Men so much. And I think X-Men 97 took all of these things to like an 11. And I think it creates something beautiful that is like, I think not only entertaining, but creating so much discussion, but also I think compassion and opening our minds. I mean, this is what X-Men is supposed to do. And I think, again, because of certain groups, they've vilified that to do that. And I know that Hollywood has had some of their movies have suffered, but that's because the other projects, well, I wish X-Men 97's ratings were a little higher, but the other projects, that have come under criticism or have not succeeded, they were only doing these things like, they were only doing like paying lip service. They didn't really dive in and do the actual work like X-Men 97 does. And I think, Barbie did the work too. And, even that ended up being vilified as well. I'm not saying there wouldn't be any blowback for the X-Men, the live action X-Men movie, which will have a lot larger audience if they go down this path. But as Barbie proved, you can still make a lot of money doing it if you do it right. And if also you're really faithful to the core idea of what that brand is. Unfortunately, it is a brand. The Barbie movie was very Barbie and really brought a lot of that to life. And the X-Men movie was, X-Men 97 was very X-Men. I never thought of Barbie as a comp for X-Men, the live action X-Men, but it's actually an incredible comp. Greta Gerwig to do the X-Men movies? Let's see if she's an X-Men fan. I wouldn't be surprised if she was. All right, so as I said in my coverage also of X-Men 97, today the world is so fractured and changing so rapidly that almost everyone feels disenfranchised these days. And I think the X-Men stories not only depict how that can go horribly wrong, with like the really horrible groups like Friends of Humanity, but also show a better path forward. For a long time, a lot of people couldn't see themselves in the X-Men, but I think today, almost everyone can. And why on earth would you want to see yourself in the other group, man? All right, story is vital, but come on, we're also talking about comic book characters, and the X-Men have all of these amazing powers. So you gotta have trading card style action sequences. I mean, the fact that X-Men 97 understood the trading card, style is, I think, key to its success, with the fandom. When you watch X-Men 97, you will notice not only the X-Men working together as a team, but also almost every member still gets a chance to shine solo. A trading card moment where you get to see them not only use their powers, but in an awe-inspiring way, particularly the Omega level mutants. I think people like I know a lot of you get chills when you hear the term Omega level mutant. I think not only because if someone, a show is coming up of supreme powers, but I think you can almost feel that power yourself. And I think that it's particularly an emotional, reaction when you feel powerless beforehand. To go from that, isn't that also beautiful? Oh my gosh, it's gorgeous. For groups that feel powerless to suddenly become so powerful, I think the X-Men allows people to feel that. And that's just incredible, right? You thought these mutants had nothing, but in fact, they're the most powerful beings on the earth. And, look at their fury, but they're still compassionate. Well, at least some of them are. All right. X-Men 97 had incredible trading card moments, particularly for Cyclops, Storm, Rogue, Jean Grey, Nightcrawler, Jubilee. Freaking Jubilee had amazing moments on this show. And of course, Magneto and Xavier. Let fans have their moment, not only to cheer on their favorite characters, but to bask in their awesomeness and be like, yep, that's why I love that character. But that leads to my next point. It's not all about Wolverine. Sure, we love the guy, but he's not the only member of the X-Men. And X-Men 97 was very popular despite him not having a large role. But maybe if it had a little more Wolverine, it would have done a little bit better in the ratings. So I'm sure there's a balance to be found, somewhere between X-Men 97 and the X-Men movies, which were all Wolverine. And they did great. I'm so excited to see Wolverine return later this summer. But it's not all about Magneto and Xavier either, although X-Men 97 found new levels for their discourse, which was fascinating. Fans love other X-Men too, though, particularly the ones that I mentioned, who got their trading card moments. I know that a lot of X-Men powers can be expensive to do in live action, which is why, maybe they don't always get as much screen time as we would have liked in the past. But I feel at this point, we've come a long way with VFX and what we can do and how we can make them a little more affordable. You have movies now, they're almost like 90% animated, even though they're passing for live action. And when it comes to The Lion King, it's fully CGI passed as live action. So I think you could do the X-Men's powers. We'll talk about budget a little bit in a moment. But I didn't know it would be worth it. It will be an investment that I feel, if done right, pays off. By the way, loving other X-Men is why Gambit's death hit so hard, which is why it's also important to remember the X-Men die. Don't worry, they usually come back, but when you have such a large roster, you can afford to rotate. In fact, you must rotate because you don't want people to get too tired of any of the characters and you want to spotlight as many characters as possible. But having X-Men be able to die off, again, don't worry, they come back, it allows for stories with very high stakes. And characters then often make dramatic sacrifices to be killed off in the first place, but then they make triumphant and sometimes twisted returns. So you just keep generating high stakes, great story. Like we all know that Gambit is coming back as one of Apocalypse's horsemen as Death, and it will be deliciously dark. Now, the reason we all know that is because it comes from the comics, which leads to yet another important lesson: follow the comic stories. Again, the MCU did that back in the day, and it allowed fans to engage in a way that they couldn't with any other comic book franchise. It allows us to discuss what was the original story, what was its legacy, how was it received at the time, how have they changed it, how have they made it better, how have they made it worse. It really allows, again, as I said, for that discourse. And I think that the Marvel movies lately have lost that a little bit because, again, they're not, Secret Invasion is a perfect example. It paid so little attention to the source material that conversation did not happen, which is vital, again, to not just comic book properties, but particularly something that put Marvel on the map in the first place. By the way, X-Men 97 even replicated famous X-Men comic book panels to incredible effect, not only because of the nostalgia factor, but because these were great panels. Again, I think that sometimes Hollywood is too dismissive of the source material, particularly when it's a visual medium like comics. Zack Snyder has benefited from that. Robert Rodriguez with Sin City. When you do it, fans notice and they love it. And nobody has more complex comic book storylines than the X-Men, Marvel's long-running soap opera. Look how fast X-Men 97 is going through famous stories. And that's after all the stories that the original Fox animated series already did back in the day. And they have all this new material. Now, sure, some of us are worried that there won't be any material left for the live-action X-Men. But again, the X-Men 97 ratings they're okay. They're good. I think the show has been very successful for Disney+. But we'd love it if it was showing up in the Nielsen ratings, right? So the majority of audiences haven't seen it. So you could redo some of these things. I mean, it would be a little tough maybe for us who would just watched X-Men 97, but we don't know how far off an X-Men movie is either, a live action one. But this means that X-Men 97 is not only reinvigorating the diehard fans, but it's allowed Marvel to have a testing ground to see if this approach would go over well, and go over well it has. Although, again, with the diehard fans, I wonder why it hasn't done better with a broader audience. Is it because it's animated? Are people that turned off by animation? I mean, I thought we were getting somewhere, but, you know, Invincible, Bad Batch, although maybe there are other elements at play there. But maybe some mainstream appeal does need to be layered into a live action movie. But that doesn't mean these other lessons aren't really important. That's why I also think keep that budget low. Animation is cheaper than live action, which is why X-Men 97 exists in the first place, why it's able to take the risks that it does. For the live action movie, I mean, it's harder. Again, it's going to cost a lot more money to do that. But what I would do is I'd probably get a mostly unknown cast, which worked just fine in, again, the early days of the MCU. And then I would spend most of my money on the visual effects so that I could bring the team truly to life. And therefore, I'd keep my budget at $100 million. I wouldn't even say around $100 million because I don't want you to go over $100 million. If you want to go a little under $100 million, more power to you, but not over $100 million. That would give me a little leeway to do these things that would make the X-Men authentic and free the production from having to worry about hitting $1 billion so that the studio can make a profit at all. I mean, sure, it would be great to hit $1 billion anyway, and Barbie did, but, you know, keep that budget down. You can't do all these things that I'm talking about. You can't have the strong commentary, especially today, at a high budget. Because if the studio is greenlighting a $200 million budget, then they're going to want the blandest crowd pleaser they can find. And that's just not the X-Men. So you got to keep that budget really low. Finally, my last lesson from X-Men 97 is don't be so serious. I mean, for all the commentary that it does, X-Men 97 was also a very light show. I mean, when you're wearing all black leather, it's hard to do anything but brood. Sure, Wolverine got to crack some jokes, but not many others did. And let's be honest, he was brooding while he joked, which is totally very Wolverine. But X-Men 97, again, as I said, had fun. And I'm not just talking downtime between missions, which are crucial to depicting the X-Men, by the way. They're always doing something, having a cookout, playing basketball, going to the beach. Love it. But they also have fun on the missions themselves. They also have passion. When things get serious, when the missions, you know, when things look bleak, as it so often does for the X-Men, because again, don't forget that rule, the X-Men can die. But the team wears their emotions on their sleeve, which in turn lets the audience in. Also, the X-Men characters aren't just stereotypes, but have tremendous depth. I talked a lot about how they showed Professor Xavier as a full-on teacher rather than just a figurehead, but there was a lot of depth for many of the characters, which I thought was really incredibly well done. So they didn't feel like Hollywood types, right? And that's another great reason to cast unknowns, because they don't bring any outside, personality with them. But the characters in X-Men 97 felt like people that we know, or even better yet, ourselves. Soap opera, remember it. That's what the X-Men so very much are. And it works. It works. I know that other things have tried to do these things, be soap opera-y, have strong commentary, and it hasn't worked. But find the people like X-Men 97 did, maybe even use the same people who clearly love the source material and get it and understand why the source material works. And again, you have tremendous talent that wrote these original stories that I don't feel Hollywood. I mean, it's hard to write, for one, it's a different skill set to write for different mediums. Just because you can write for comic books doesn't mean you can write a screenplay. Even if just you can write for TV doesn't mean you can write a movie. But it also doesn't mean you can't learn. So I think these lessons are really, really important. So that's my thoughts on the lessons that the MCU can take away from X-Men 97 for their live action X-Men. And I'm very curious, as I said, to hear your thoughts down below. Share them, subscribe today, and of course, as always, you can check out some more videos right now.